Many centuries have passed since the global cataclysm, and from that moment, a new profession emerged. Those who mastered it could control the power of various elements: iron, copper, nitrogen, calcium, silicon, iodine. The strength of some of these elements was so immense that people could wield it for their own purposes. Additionally, one could continuously learn to gain new skills and control more elements. Those who managed to do this faster than anyone else quickly became authorities and were seen as leaders among the rest. They easily instilled fear in the populations of entire cities. For anyone who defied them, a cruel punishment awaited, even death. Moreover, the power to control elements could also be used to replenish one's own energy. A man who had just acquired a new skill wanted to demonstrate it in action. Almost the entire population of the large city came to witness the spectacle, and he delivered. The guards holding a sheet of metal fell to the ground, unable to keep their footing after his powerful strike. The main character watched all this from the crowd. It was the first time he had seen anything like it in person, having only read about it in books before. He dreamed of becoming as strong as that man. In his mind, he constantly heard a voice, and there it was again. However, he had no time to finally start training. The boy was a diligent student and attended classes every day. Yet, the voice wouldn't let him be, and he began to think he was losing his mind. The boy begged it to be quiet, but it didn't help. Suddenly, he realized that the voice had chosen him, and he was meant to become the new master, passing through several open trials. Furthermore, a plaque with a name appeared before him. But what did it all mean? He had never seen anything like this before. And why was he the chosen one? The system recognized him immediately. He tried to make sense of the plaque. There were many different names, but he didn't recognize any of them. Suddenly, a girl named Shining appeared before him. Everyone who saw her was taken aback, as they had no idea who she was. The man introduced her. This year, luck smiled upon the people as they would manifest their own elements under her guidance. They wanted to start the task immediately, and the man announced this to everyone. Moreover, she was very young, and the main character was of the same age as her. After these words, he left, and the girl was left alone with the people. Most people couldn't believe they would finally get their element, and they knew that those in the alliance could fully control it. They also couldn't believe that the girl, despite her youth, already possessed such incredible power and could expertly control her element. But what was her main weapon, and why was she the chosen one? To dispel the doubts that arose in the crowd, she planned to demonstrate her power. For this, she used ordinary ore that lay beneath her feet, as the alliance's resources were limited. Very soon, it became clear that her power was anything but ordinary, as she used ore from another dimension. The first step was to manifest her element. Then, she began to transform it and give it a certain shape. After that, it was crucial to clearly envision the object that was to emerge as a result. When a person masters this technique, they become a true master. Only then could the element appear. Her element was a dragon, which she could vividly imagine and present to the crowd. Shining skillfully commanded it. Because of this, it quickly transformed into a true monster. Her dragon was incredibly powerful and could destroy everything in its path. It also fed on metal and obliterated the sheet that the man had tested before. Moreover, the dragon did this with ease. It seemed to be a formidable weapon for Shining. After all, she could control it however she wished and make it do anything for her. In reality, this dragon formed from a small piece of metal, and when it vanished, most people thought it was just a dream or some kind of vision. The man was satisfied. He hadn't made a mistake in choosing her as the leader of this trial. He believed that everyone present who participated in the trial could achieve immense power if they listened to her and learned. Everyone had a chance to get closer to her level of strength and master their own element, so immediately most people wanted to join the alliance. This year, there were very few spots, and only the top 10 could become students of the alliance. To begin the trial and start learning, a sacrifice was required. For this, one had to use fire and their own blood. At that moment, the main character felt scared. He was terrified. The best time for the sacrifice was midnight, and it required fire and one's own blood, all to be done in just 1 minute. After that, a heavy downpour began, soaking all their clothes. Teacher Zhang called the boy to keep him from getting wet. He wanted to take him with him. He had business with the main character and wanted him to help. He needed to escort a lieutenant to a meeting, so Gowning had to cover for him in another group's class. Gowning promised to do it and was ready to take on that responsibility. And at that moment, he ran to avoid getting any wetter. Zhang just bowed to him and was very grateful that the boy had listened to him. Despite the family's difficult financial situation, He was very polite and smart. Whenever there was an opportunity to earn some money, he immediately agreed to any job. Everyone around loved him, as he constantly helped people and was a diligent and good student. After a while, he was teaching the older group and all the students were thrilled with him. That was when a test was supposed to take place. Most students weren't prepared for the exam, so they tried to persuade the boy to postpone it. However, he refused, believing that the quiz was very easy and necessary, especially since it related to the topic they had covered last time. Also, he was liked by all the girls, and instead of listening to a boring lecture, they wanted to spend more time with him and chat. He didn't care about that and didn't want to let his teacher down. So he was determined to conduct the lesson at all costs. Moreover, he was strict with them and promised that at the end of the lecture, there would be a quiz to help them remember everything and prepare better for the final exams at the end of the year. But his phone died, so he needed to step out, and he instructed one of the girls to keep an eye on everyone while he was gone. The girl was very pleased that he chose her as the main one, as she secretly had a crush on Gowning. The boy walked down the street, shielding himself from the rain. Suddenly, he heard a very familiar voice and panicked, fearing he had been caught skipping class. It was his mother, Zuzelen Gowning, who was surprised to see him out in such weather. Her sister had come to the city, and she had gone to her house to help. She also asked what the boy was doing outside, as it was class time and he should have been in lessons. However, she understood that he was old enough to decide for himself what to do. But no matter what happened, she worried about him and wanted him to come home early to see his aunt, who had brought food and sweets for him. Moreover, she went outside and called his mother to clean up another part of the house. The woman was busy and couldn't talk to him any longer, but she repeated her request. The boy smiled at her and said she didn't need to worry about him, as he was just about to head to class. His aunt came out and invited him to come inside their house, but he refused, as he was in a hurry and promised to come back in the evening. It was a shame that such a talented and well-mannered boy was born in a forgotten land, as this place had ruined many lives. The woman's words didn't sit well with the boy, and he thought she was mistaken, but he understood that their fates were not the same as those of people living in the city's capital. Still, he couldn't change anything. Despite being born in such a place, he needed to find a way to become much stronger and change his life, as that was the only way he could provide a good life for his loved ones. Suddenly, he saw a new announcement stating that he urgently needed to perform a ritual to start his training. But what would happen if he didn't make the sacrifice? He doubted he could do it, but he had no other choice. He was scared, but he began pressing the buttons to start his painting. Still, he decided to give it a try, as he didn't want to spend his whole life in a forgotten land. After the trial began, he needed to activate the difficulty level. Many different scenarios appeared before him, but he had to choose only one. To gain the best abilities, he needed to complete tasks, and he could earn rewards for additional tasks depending on their difficulty level. At the medium level, there were 2 attempts, and the chance of getting the first level was 50%, while the chance of receiving a reward was 1%. At the harder level, the chance of getting a reward was twice as high, and the chance of receiving a valuable prize was 50%. The nightmare level guaranteed a 100% chance of receiving all possible rewards. Learning this, he felt joy, as this reward could help him and was the best option for him. Despite being unsure of his own abilities, he decided to choose the harder level. After carefully considering all the options, he pressed the button. A notification appeared before him about the level he had chosen. Now, his chance of receiving a reward was 50%. Now, he wanted to try to complete the task as quickly as possible to finally earn his reward. Immediately, he received a hint. His task was to catch the genius that was Shining. She had started training at a very young age, but she couldn't handle such a heavy load. The girl decided to escape into the sewers, where she had hidden her whole life, and it was there that she constantly heard very strange sounds. Gowning thought about the possibility of rats living in the sewers and couldn't believe she could be afraid of them. However, he understood that the trial wasn't as easy as it seemed. There was something else. He became so focused on his thoughts that he completely forgot about the lesson he was supposed to teach his students, and the people watching him couldn't understand what was happening to him. He believed that a beautiful creature lived in the sewers, and it was her he needed to find. Meanwhile, events shifted to a hotel. In one of the rooms was Shining. She was training and practicing her strikes. Suddenly, there was a knock at her door. It was Lieutenant Chin, who told her that after he and the woman switched rooms, he received many love letters. He thought the boys sending the letters were very arrogant, but in reality, they shouldn't even expect a response. His room was piled with them and soon he wouldn't be able to move freely around the room. The woman ordered him to resolve this issue and find someone who could help him. However, there was one letter that she should pay attention to. The one who wrote it was the son of a respected official, who was currently standing outside the hotel. They could secure support from his father and mend their relationship with the capital and the Forgotten Lands, as they were currently in a bad position. Qin wanted the woman to meet with him and tried to persuade her to do so. However, in response to his words, she only handed him a flash drive. It contained secret materials about the Forgotten Lands, and he needed to study them carefully and think about what they should do. Qin apologized for bothering her and promised to do everything as she instructed. The woman couldn't believe that her lieutenant suggested this to her, as she didn't believe the Forgotten Lands could be saved, and in her opinion, the people living there were doomed. In reality, she understood that the city was very restless. However, she had no time for that, as she was currently focused on training and wanted to improve her skills. Moreover, she loved herself and constantly healed herself with her mirror technique. Meanwhile, the man spent a lot of time waiting outside the hotel for her. He had already begun to doubt that he would succeed. However, he didn't get discouraged, as he believed that sooner or later he would win her over. Moreover, his friend considered him a true genius and believed he could easily get into the best university in the capital. But to do that, he needed to deliver something to the woman. It was so important that he could easily become famous. Right now was the most suitable moment for this, as he could get the key by entering her room and presenting his gift. But doing so wasn't easy, as it was very dangerous, and he could end up dead. Suddenly, they encountered the main character on their way and were very surprised that he was carrying such a large bag. Immediately, they thought the boy was about to pay the lieutenant, but he didn't even notice them and just walked on. Then, Tang couldn't hold back and stopped him to find out where he was going and what he intended to do. Gowning pretended not to notice him, which only frustrated Tang more. Tang tried to pique his interest and began talking about a very lucrative deal. Hearing this, the hero actually stopped as he needed money more than ever at that moment. The boy tried to calm the main character, as when he heard about the money, he immediately started shouting and trying to find out what needed to be done for it. In reality, he needed help to get the key to room 1 in the hotel, and for that, he was going to pay him 50,000. When the main character heard this, he realized he could get arrested if caught, so Tang offered him double the reward, and he agreed. However, before that, Ganong wanted to receive an advance. The man had no choice and agreed to pay him, and he promised to do his job. The boy was very pleased, as this money would help him a lot. His friend wanted to do the same and promised he could handle this task as well if he was paid the same. However, in reality, they weren't planning to throw him out for a completely different reason. If something went wrong, they wouldn't be suspected. It would be the main character, especially with his huge backpack. It was hard not to notice him. Meanwhile, Gaoneng was already inside the building, carefully looking at the room numbers on the doors, trying to find the right one. He was trying to find out if there were any available hourly rooms, but all of them were occupied. The woman was watching him closely, and when she saw it was Gaoneng, she couldn't believe her eyes. She immediately replied that, in fact, there were a few available rooms left. She also asked if he needed a room for 2 people. But when the boy replied that he had come to meet Shen her expression changed immediately. It seemed he had just shattered her heart, as she had hoped to be able to enter his room. She looked at him in surprise, hoping he was just joking. However, the guy was completely serious, and no one needed to know what kind of sacrifice he was planning to make there. To do this, he chose a room next to the one where the woman lived. This way, Tang could meet her. He thanked the girl for her help and left. She watched him go, marveling at how handsome and charming he was. The longer she looked at him, the more she liked him. He had to pay 40,000 for the key, and if he had known it would cost that much, he would have preferred to steal it. They also showed him the layout of the building where the girl lived and the room he rented next to hers. Despite spending half his money on the key, he felt no shame about it. In fact, he had it all planned out and knew that by going to the woman, Tang would end up in Qin's room. He did this because he knew they wanted to use him to avoid taking the blame. Meanwhile, a lot of time had passed and the men continued to stand outside. They thought the main character had tricked them and were plotting their revenge. Tang couldn't take it anymore and ordered the man to come and bring him a new key because he could wait no longer. However, he didn't want to make it so easy, and for a fee, he promised to get it. But he wasn't as clever or charming as the main character, so Tang refused to pay him. He promised to punish him if he didn't get the key. 10 minutes later, the key was in his hands. For doing such a good job, the man promised to buy him new things the next day. He understood perfectly, realizing that the moment he had been waiting for had finally come. He believed that this day would be the most important day of his life. After all, he had fallen in love with the woman at first sight, and he was ready to fight for her at any cost. He had no regrets, so he confidently opened the door. Tang believed she would be thrilled to see him and that everything would work out. However, when he stepped inside, he saw no one there. But he quickly realized that the room wasn't empty. He could hear someone inside, and at that moment, he felt his heart racing. Someone was in the shower, and Tang couldn't wait for her to come out. He stood in the room with a bouquet of flowers. She had a beautiful figure, and seeing that made him incredibly happy. Immediately, he started fixing his hair, knowing how to win a girl's heart at first sight. Unable to wait any longer, he knocked on the bathroom door, believing he was a true expert in love. Hearing him, the person in the robe turned toward him. Now was the most crucial moment of his life. Only then did he feel that he would truly be happy. First love should be unexpected, so he stepped into the bathroom. He believed that as soon as the woman saw him, she would fall in love at first sight. He didn't want to ruin this beautiful moment, so to make an even stronger impression, he knelt down. At that moment, the cold fell to the ground and he began to confess his love. He spoke many tender words, admitting that he loved her more than his own life. He stayed in that position for a while, and he didn't dare to open his eyes, knowing that his sudden appearance might scare her, so he wanted to wait until she calmed down. He believed that in a few minutes, her voice would become calm and she would fall in love with him forever. However, none of this happened, and the person standing before him remained silent. In fact, it wasn't a woman at all, but some unknown man who seemed very angry to see him. At that moment, Tang realized he had made a terrible mistake, as he had entered the wrong room. Tang was on his knees before him. He simply couldn't believe he had found himself in such a situation. Out of fear, he began to scream. He saw how furious the man was and was about to hit him as soon as he saw him. The stranger thought he was a criminal, and the first thing he did was kick him. After all, he had heard his confession of love and everything he had said. At the same time, things were chaotic in the hotel and the neighbors called the police. The security guards working at the hotel also heard suspicious noises. They quickly gathered and were about to go to the room from which the sounds of a fight were coming, thinking it was criminals. Tang tried to explain everything, but Lieutenant Qin didn't even want to listen to him. He grabbed him by the hair and started dragging him out, trying to throw him out of his room. Tang wouldn't let go and kept holding onto his leg. Suddenly, police officers entered the room, witnessing what was happening. At that moment, the naked lieutenant was trying to shake off the guy while his bouquet of flowers lay on the floor. The officers were stunned when they saw this and couldn't move. Tang and Qin immediately understood what they were thinking about them. However, the police didn't dare to enter the room and stood at the entrance. They quickly apologized for disturbing them and left the room, closing the door behind them. Secretly, they began to mock the men, thinking they were lovers. Meanwhile, the main character, who was in the neighboring room, couldn't understand why there was such a panic. However, at that moment, he heard footsteps approaching his room. Gowning peeked through the door crack to see what was really happening, and suddenly he saw a woman heading straight toward him. He couldn't make sense of it. Was Shinninger now living on another floor? If that were the case, he had miscalculated everything. But it was already too late, and despite what had happened, he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. He quickly gathered himself, and within a few minutes, he managed to sneak into her room. He was satisfied with his work, having gone unnoticed and done everything very quietly. When he entered, he wasn't mistaken. He realized that the room truly belonged to Shinninger. He had a specific mission. He needed to find the item that allowed her to control her dragon. He believed it was somewhere in the room, and if he could sell it, he could make a good profit. However, he didn't relax, knowing that searching lay ahead and he needed to be very careful. He also needed to find a safe place to hide if she returned to her room. The only place that could completely conceal him was the wardrobe. Suddenly, he heard her footsteps and realized she had returned too quickly. He had no time as he needed to hide from her, so he decided to climb inside the wardrobe. Just then, the door to the room opened. The woman entered completely unaware. The main character was very nervous. Although he had left no traces, he worried they would find him. Meanwhile, the woman went to take a shower. While she was in the bath, the guy sat in the wardrobe, listening intently. He prayed, but after her shower, she went to bed, knowing she would likely want to get dressed and would head in his direction. A few minutes later, she finished, but she didn't rush to the wardrobe. He felt her footsteps moving away. and he understood that she was likely leaving him. However, everything changed quickly and he heard them again. She was approaching and he began to panic. Suddenly, she stopped right in front of him and opened the wardrobe. He was incredibly lucky. She saw nothing and was blindly picking out clothes. Her hand was just inches from his face and out of fear, he was ready to die right there. Ganning held his breath and prayed she wouldn't touch him. Fortunately, she found what she was looking for and chose the right outfit. After that, she closed the door and left, leaving him behind. She picked out pajamas with bunny ears, and the guy never expected a major to wear such clothes. After that, he began to look at other costumes that made him laugh. After a while, when she lay in her bed, despite being incredibly strong, Shen Ning'er was just an ordinary girl like all the other girls. Even though she was now very successful and lived in comfort, she had gone through tough times in her childhood. She had spent many years in the sewers, adding incredible fear and cold. She constantly suffered from crises that haunted her everywhere with their loud noise. Also, the animals were very hungry and constantly tried to bite and eat her. She often woke up from nightmares that haunted her almost every night. And there, she saw those feelings that also tried to bite her. This dream haunted her many times and continued for several years. Because of this, she became very attentive to various sounds and easily heard the water dripping in the bathroom. This alarmed her greatly as it seemed she had turned off the water well. Moreover, that sound was very familiar to her as she had heard the same in the sewers. Immediately, she grabbed her phone and tried to call the hotel management. However, the phone didn't work, and she heard nothing. Instead of the ringing and the pleasant voice of the staff, she heard only an unbearable squeak. Because of this, she became very frightened, recalling the terrifying times and fearing she might end up in the sewers again. Trying to avoid this, she hid under the blanket. However, thoughts of the unbearable mice wouldn't let her rest. She felt as if they were starting to crawl on her and were trying to bite her again. The girl was very scared and she began to panic. In her panic, she started screaming and throwing everything around her, as if mice were truly attacking her. Even though she had escaped the sewers, they continued to haunt her throughout her life and wouldn't leave her alone. Even in her new home, she tried to calm herself, thinking it was just a terrible dream. However, she could no longer endure this and wanted to escape her room. But it was too late, because the door leading out was blocked by a huge rat that stood in front of her. Shen Ning'er begged it not to come closer, but it started squeaking and ran toward her. Still, she had no choice and had to use her own strength to protect herself. With one blow, she managed to stop it. The hit was so strong that the rat flew a great distance away from her. It stopped at the other end of the room, the wall was smashed, and a crack formed from the powerful impact. She believed the rat had lost consciousness, but it didn't suffer any harm and quickly opened its eyes. After that, it got back on its feet and stood before her again. Now she understood that she was defenseless and begged it not to come closer. However, the rat didn't listen to her and began to approach her. Her body started shaking from the incredible fear she felt at that moment. She could no longer endure this and suddenly began to lose consciousness. Then she understood nothing and thought she had died. Suddenly it spoke to her, leaning over her body. I made sure once again that she had lost consciousness and was no longer a threat. Only after that did he dare to remove the costume in which the main character was actually sitting. He felt a lot of pain from her blow which he felt on his own body. However, her strength was incomprehensible to him, and he knew something strange had happened. After all, any person who encounters the ghosts of their past cannot control themselves and remain calm. Now that nothing threatened him, he could begin his sacrificial ritual. Meanwhile, Tang left the hotel, vowing to take revenge for the finances for what had been done to him. But his friend tried to talk him out of it, saying that if something happened, they would be in danger. However, the guy was impossible to persuade because he had been beaten, and he couldn't allow that. They couldn't just walk away, and he was going to take a desperate step despite being warned not to do so. In fact, he didn't trust the lieutenant and didn't believe he could harm him. Because Tang's father was a very influential person, he believed that because of this they wouldn't touch him. Also, he knew that the lieutenant and his army wanted to interfere in the Forgotten Lands, so he needed to stop them from doing so. Because in the Forgotten Lands, there had been an order for several hundred years, and only 3 states were the true emperors of those lands. If the Alliance wants to bring him back under their control, they need to choose one of the 3 leaders to unite all their forces. Tang believed they would choose his father, and that thought filled him with immense confidence. As long as his father commanded an entire army, they wouldn't dare do anything to him. Not even the lieutenant, who was a very influential soldier, had that kind of authority. If the guys could pull this off today, he would have to compromise, and he wanted to convince him after the ceremony was over. Hearing this, the boy immediately changed his demeanor and started speaking differently. He wanted Tang to take him with him to the city after their victory. He had a special potion he planned to slip into Shininger's drink, and now was the perfect time for it since it was very late and she was asleep. It was so powerful that even the gods couldn't handle it. Meanwhile, the main character sat in front of the girl's body, who was still unconscious. He didn't regret spending so much time in the sewers, recording the sounds of mice that helped him do this. Midnight was approaching, so he needed to prepare for the sacrifice. For that, he needed blood and fire, which he had bought at the market. Then, he started painting her face, creating a special pattern. Everything turned out so well that he was pleased with the result. After that, he began preparing for his speech. Ganning believed that now his life could change. He would finally start his trial and earn a lot of money. Time passed and he continued to prepare. Gaoneng was so happy that he even forgot that she could wake up at any moment. However, he quickly saw a notification that the sacrifice was not complete. This was because he had said the slogan too quietly and it needed to be shouted louder for the task to begin and the mission to be accomplished. But Gaoneng couldn't do that. He was in a hotel and risked waking everyone up. Moreover, his victim could also wake up, but he had no choice and couldn't just give up. So, gathering his strength, he prepared to shout the words again. Suddenly, he caught a strange scent in the air, and realized it was ecstasy. Suddenly, the door to his room began to open. Slowly and quietly, Tang entered and ordered his friend to stay outside and keep watch so that no one else could come in. However, Tang was very surprised when he saw the main character inside. The boy had lost consciousness from his poison and lay on the ground. At that moment, he believed he had once again mistaken the doors as his friend had shouted something different. Right in front of them lay the girl who was the victim of a mysterious ritual. Now the boys were confused as they couldn't understand what was really happening and why the main character and she were in the same room. He started shouting, trying to figure out why he had done this. Despite Gaoneng regaining consciousness, his head hurt and he couldn't move. Tang laughed, realizing he too had fallen under the influence of the poison. He had a brilliant idea, as he understood that the main character was helpless and he was going to pin all the blame on him. He planned to assault the girl right in front of him, after which he would accuse him of everything. He intended to become the hero who saves the girl. Gathering his strength, the boy shouted his words one last time, after which his sacrifice would be counted. This was his message and he understood that perhaps this was his only chance to say it. After that, he was so exhausted that he also lost consciousness and ended up on the ground next to the girl's body. Tang didn't understand anything and didn't know what he meant by that or why he had started shouting. However, he couldn't let him do it again, as then someone would definitely hear them and find out. So he ordered his friend to hold the main character and not let him escape. They tied his hands. They did it so tightly that the boy struggled again, but he didn't know if his task had been counted or if he needed to start all over again. But suddenly a new notification appeared before him and he realized that a new level was just starting to load. He also saw a message that he had successfully completed the first task and soon his trial would begin. His name and age appeared in the system now that he was a new participant. There was also basic information about him, his home, and school. After that, he saw his own stats, status, talents, and blood value. He observed everything happening, even though the criminals continued to hold him. The system had a special tab for evolution and special abilities that could be upgraded. However, despite having a very handsome face, his blood and energy levels were average. His hidden talent level was low. But despite that, his strongest affinity was with iron. The strongest ability was supposed to unlock after baptism. He was also supposed to receive the strongest ability of his victim. And she possessed hidden talents that were very developed. He realized that she could transition to daylight saving time very well, and that became his ability. Immediately, a lot of energy began to surge, which meant his skills were starting to strengthen. At the same time, his hidden talents were being enhanced. And he immediately saw on the screen that his strength and other stats began to rise. After the upgrade was completed, he felt as if he had soared into the sky. His talents were completely refreshed, and now his stats were at maximum level. All his talents and other abilities were full. However, he didn't understand what evolution meant, And if its indicator was at maximum, did that mean his trial would end? And what did he need to do for that? He received his first reward, a chest filled with gifts. Moreover, he could buy a special skill, which was the third set of special gymnastics for students. It was a very valuable item as many students wanted to get it for themselves and only he could possess it now. The men holding him didn't understand why he was so happy and couldn't figure out what he was saying to himself. Maybe he had lost his mind. However, they were so distracted by him that they completely forgot about Shininger, who was already starting to wake up. Now he had no choice and he needed to come up with a new plan quickly. At that moment, he was about to use the new skills he had gained after completing the sacrifice. And he started dancing. Without realizing it, he managed to hit the guys. He did it so suddenly that the guys, startled and in pain, fell to the ground. Tang ordered to restrain him, thinking that out of fear and the effects of the poison, he had lost his mind. So, they needed to stop him from dancing and force him to quit. But suddenly, the boy began to perform a new move and hit the man who was attacking him again. Because he was dancing and fighting them, his energy grew and his stats improved. Tang thought his dancing wouldn't help him deal with them and escape. His friend was useless, so he decided to grab him himself, but he also missed a hit. He was convinced that the main character had lost his mind and it was very hard to deal with such people. So, he took decisive action and became a knife. Suddenly, someone knocked on their door. It was the security major, who wanted to check if everything was all right. They heard suspicious sounds coming from their room, so they came to investigate. And when the girl didn't respond, they began to break down the door and tried to get inside the room. Very soon, they would break down the door and see what had happened inside the room. Realizing this, Tang became very scared and started to panic. Everything was going wrong. Just then, they heard a strange sound behind them and turned around. Then, they realized that Gowning had outsmarted them, as he had a backup exit and was about to use it now. Gowning knew the guys wanted to pin all the blame on him, so he had thought several steps ahead. Moreover, he had in his hands the thing they were trying to find. It was a capsule that the girl could use to summon her dragon and control its power. Suddenly, the hero threw it to the ground. It broke upon impact. Saying goodbye to them, he jumped out the window and disappeared, leaving the men in the apartment with the girl's body. From the broken capsule, energy began to be released. Very quickly, the same dragon appeared, starting to grow right before their eyes. And seeing its master's body, it was ready to destroy the men who had harmed her. At that moment, the lieutenant kicked in the front door because no one had answered. But when he saw the dragon in front of him, he couldn't believe his eyes. He also saw Tang, whom they had already encountered before. However, that wasn't all. Tang was trying to cover the girl's body. He failed to do so, and the police saw everything that was happening. Moreover, he had a knife in his hands. Tang tried to explain everything, but no one even doubted that he was guilty of what had happened. Because of this, Qin hit him in the face. Tang sat against the wall. He begged them not to touch him. However, it was too late. The lieutenant understood what had happened and had no doubt that he was involved. He also knew that the man had used drugs to poison the girl. Despite Tang talking about the evidence he had, the soldier was ready to kill him at that moment. However, the dragon was not calming down and began to get angry. While the men fought, he tried to revive his master. He was giving all his life energy to her. And still, she regained consciousness and stood on her feet. The dragon saved her and she was no longer afraid. When the man saw her, he realized that something truly terrible was about to happen. He ordered all the soldiers to flee, as if they didn't, they would die. At that moment, the dragon was about to attack them. Even the fact that the girl had regained consciousness didn't stop him. Unexplainable debris began to fall to the ground, created by the dragon. Tang understood that they wanted to kill him. He begged them to let him go as he had something very important. However, that didn't work. The beast struck him. The blow was so strong that the flash drive he had in his pocket flew away from him. Tang lay on the ground. It hurt so much that he couldn't breathe. However, he deeply regretted how things had turned out, as he didn't want to take all the blame. The men exited the room, but they understood that if this continued, the whole hotel would be destroyed. However, they had no more time. They needed to escape as the entire floor began to collapse. The lieutenant understood that it was all because of the dragon, which was emitting so much energy that everything around it was falling apart. When Gowning was descending the rope, he saw an explosion go off in the major's room. He didn't know the dragon was that strong, but now everything was starting to break down because of it. However, it was too late to fix anything. The boy continued to descend and after a while successfully landed on the ground. Suddenly, a flash drive that belonged to the man fell near him. Gowning began to carefully examine the suspicious object, but he didn't know who it belonged to. In fact, he was glad when this item ended up in his hands and definitely wanted to figure out what it really was. He looked at the hotel and saw flames spreading across the entire floor. Very soon, the police would arrive at the scene, so he left to avoid drawing attention to himself. He immediately approached the hotel staff, but she was busy on a phone call. He wanted to grab his things from the hotel as quickly as possible and move out. Gowning simply left his key and walked away. Moreover, he didn't know if the guys would testify against him and if they remembered his appearance to try to find him and take revenge. But to avoid taking any risks, he wanted to handle everything on his own. He stayed for a long time, and when he was sure he was far enough away and safe, he was able to stop. Suddenly, he saw that he had one more chest left that he hadn't opened yet. So, he decided to do it right now. As a gift, he received a new item and didn't know how to use it. In fact, it was an elixir. By using it, he could gain stats such as random skill upgrades, energy, and strength upgrades. Also, in his profile, he saw many changes regarding his strength and health level. He gained more new hidden abilities and his physical strength increased. Now, he had the opportunity to unlock all his skills at maximum level, plus he could do it on his own. The medicine he received could help him in a tough moment. After that, he returned to his own house. It was very late, so his mother was already asleep at the table waiting for his return. He tried to be quiet as he made his way to his room, hoping not to wake her up. However, the woman stirred and saw that he had returned. She had prepared dinner for him, eggs and 2 pieces of meat that Auntie had set aside just for him. Now, she warmed up the dishes and placed them on the table. Then they started talking about his entrance exams. Only a few days were left and the main character was trying to get into the Central Military University. The initial fee was 1,000, but they didn't have that kind of money and the boy promised to find it by then. The food was delicious and he thanked his mom for it. He also wanted her to try a piece of meat. And he began to feed her. Mom smiled at him and agreed to try it for his sake. He promised that once he got into the university they would finally be able to move and eat meat every day. The woman was very sleepy, so she went to bed, making him finish all the food left on the table. It seemed she didn't believe he had grown up. To her, he was still a little boy who needed to be fed and cared for. However, Gowning disagreed. He felt he was old enough to support the family and earn money on his own. Suddenly, a new notification popped up in front of him. The system recognized who his target was and that he had sacrificed her, so he received a new task, manly responsibility. To start the new task, he unlocked his screen. The game began. After that, many other windows appeared and now he could choose. He needed to keep an eye on his strength level as the skill was one of the most important for men. Plus, he needed good endurance. And now he had a new task. He had only 3 days to earn 1 million coins. This would be a real challenge for him as the task was indeed very difficult. He could already picture himself rich and dreamed of changing his life. This was his chance. Now he was making a new plan as he needed to figure out where to get that much money. In his difficulty mode, the system provided him with several hints for his task. Now he had to choose a difficulty level, but before doing that he had to assess his own strength and chances of passing it. This system was unique as it worked in real time and was constantly updated. However, despite the challenging task, he understood he had to be brave and complete it. Besides, he had very little time, so he needed to start earning money immediately. To begin with, he decided to choose normal difficulty as this was his first task and he wasn't too experienced for it. Immediately, he received a notification about the difficulty level he had chosen and the percentage of rewards for completing the task. Under these conditions, he had a chance of not passing the first trial. However, despite that, he was satisfied with his choice and believed it was the best decision. Suddenly, he received a hint. The device he found would help him as it contained very valuable information he could use. After that, he got another hint. At 2 in the morning, the defenses were weakest, so that was the only chance. He needed to prepare the right tools. He was going for a heist. Gowning understood that the second hint was key. He wondered what it would be like at the highest difficulty level. When the moment for the heist came, he had to be ready not to miss his chance. Now, he needed to try to unlock the mysterious item he had obtained. He carefully inserted it into his computer, fearing it might break. Inside, there was only one folder, but despite that, it had 2 complex passwords he didn't know. However, he guessed that the folder wasn't necessary, so he calmly deleted it. After that, the system began to load. The window that appeared before him resembled some strange structure, and he realized it was a blueprint of a bank vault. However, upon closer inspection, He understood it could be some factories, and there was a logo. At that moment, the epicenter of the disaster opened up before him. He saw a strange scene on the monitor. He had found himself in some incomprehensible world. Dragons were flying around him, and people were trying to tame them. For that, they needed to create their own capsules that would contain the power of the creatures. It was the time of dragon prosperity, but after the magnetic disaster, everything changed. Today, people were trying to bring that time back, and only the chosen ones could tame a dragon. That was all he knew about that time, and beyond that he had no access to information. In the blueprints that appeared before him, there was mention of that time and the term magnetic disaster, which was definitely a clue. He also saw a map which showed a factory for magnetic toys. But what could it have to do with his task? After all, it had closed a few months ago. He also learned that it happened because of a ghost that lived there. The boy scared the workers, so they refused to work there. Reading the information in the window, he became very intrigued and wanted to know what really happened there. Did he really need to go to the closed factory and check everything? All the clues pointed to that. Perhaps there really was some magnetic thing at the factory that he needed to find. For that, he would need a hammer. Besides helping him break safes and doors, he could use it to defend himself against enemies. The key he needed to take with him could also be useful for that. A shovel would be needed to bury the bodies of his victims. Besides, he wasn't afraid of the ghost that was there and was ready to face it. Now, he was about to taste the pill he received as a reward for the first trial. It had a very strange taste, and Gowning actually liked it. Suddenly, he felt very cold. It seemed like all his internal organs were starting to freeze. His body weakened so much that he fell to the ground. He felt very strange. Gowning couldn't get up. Plus, he was freezing. Suddenly, he started to suffocate. Could the pill be poisonous? In a panic, he began to scream. He wasn't as cold anymore, but he was still gasping for air. In his panic, he tried to save himself and focused on breathing. At that moment, he saw his body's readings. His vital signs and pressure were dropping. He was dying. Now he understood what this pill was really doing. His eyes began to close. He saw his readings drop again. And if this continued, it was obvious he would die. Now, he had to do everything possible to avoid losing consciousness, as his upper limit had risen. It seemed this was a regular endurance test, and if he could withstand it, he would become even stronger. It hurt a lot, but he knew he had to endure this suffering to become much stronger. But if he couldn't break through the barrier, he would die. Now, everything depended on him, and to survive, he began to dance. Now he started to circulate blood through his body, and slowly, his readings began to recover. It worked, and he started to feel much better. The pain faded, which meant his plan had worked. Now he saw a new notification. He had passed the first stage, and gradually his body would recover. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them again, he realized he was in a new, unfamiliar place. He felt very good. He was very comfortable, and a strange warmth filled his body. He even felt hot, but now he could move his arm. After a while, he woke up. The boy got up from the floor and realized he hadn't died. He was alive. Moreover, there was a lot of strange liquid on the ground. It was everywhere, on his hands and other parts of his body. Plus, it smelled really bad, and he couldn't figure out where it came from. Immediately, he ran to the bathroom. Without thinking, he wanted to take a shower to wash off the strange liquid. Right away, he felt a surge of energy and was confident he had become stronger. After that, when he saw that all his vital signs had doubled, he now had the foundation for an energy warrior. He knew that people who had gone through the capabilities of this body could master energy combat techniques and emit a lot of energy. And if a person could break the human barrier twice before becoming an energy warrior, they could synthesize energy, purify it, and do many other things with it. Despite almost dying, it was clear that positive changes had occurred in his body. Now, he needed to find a few capsules, and then maybe he could become a true master of combat skills. The main character was so motivated that he completely forgot about the stinky liquid on his body. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the home of the deputy principal of the high school. At that moment, he was relaxing in his own house with a beautiful woman. He was so pleased with his work that he couldn't take his eyes off her painted body. He had painted a rose across the poor woman's entire back. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was the lieutenant calling. It seemed there was bad news since it was too late. He realized that the major had been attacked and found out who it was. He was very angry about what he heard. The man was so furious that he didn't even want to talk and hung up. In his anger, he kicked the table. It couldn't withstand the force of the blow and simply broke. He couldn't believe that Chin, being such a strong soldier, had dared to ask him for help. The girl lit a cigarette, as she was starting to worry too. She saw that strange things were happening with her man, and he was very nervous about this phone call. In reality, he understood that the situation was very serious and was trying to find out all the information about the attacker as quickly as possible. It looked like this time an entire alliance had been forgotten by the land. Information about these lands had not yet been confirmed, and the man knew almost nothing about it. His scouts hadn't gone silent for no reason, and he was curious about what they had actually found. It was clear that they were only working for a good salary and were genuinely interested in his affairs and personal desires. The girl didn't want to stop and wanted to continue doing what they had started. But now he had lost his inspiration. In fact, she liked him. She admired his technique and creativity, which made him unlike anyone else. And to her, it remained simply incredible. She stepped out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. But since the man didn't want to join her, she left, not intending to return next time. The woman was very strange, as she just jumped out the window. The man remained standing in his apartment. However, he couldn't shake off the phone call. He couldn't understand what had really happened. It was the father of the boy they were trying to pin the blame on, and he wanted to find a replacement to try to rescue him from prison. He needed to be saved at any cost. Meanwhile, a serious meeting began, gathering all the influential military and police figures. Chin was in charge, and now he had an important task ahead of him. He was trying to figure out what had really happened. In his hands was a letter with information about the hotel guests and what time they checked into their rooms. Now, he was trying to find out how people managed to get into the woman's room. The hotel employee confessed that she had issued the key for room 707, which belonged to her. They also knew about Gowning and now wanted to learn more about him. They knew this boy was studying at school and was very young. He also really wanted to meet the lieutenant and was waiting for the meeting. Now, they wanted to call his teacher and get all the information about the boy. They needed to find out about his home and bring a few people to locate him. He had no doubt that the main character was meant to be someone's scapegoat, and they wanted to pin this blame on him. Following his orders, the soldiers set off to the abandoned lands. They were shocked by what was happening there, as all the houses were in ruins and it was unclear how people could survive in that area. Meanwhile, the main character was preparing to carry out his task, but he had things to do, as in the evening he had to meet with his classmates to help them prepare for the exam. His mom worked 5 jobs so they could survive, so she returned home very late at night. The boys needed to do everything possible to finish their task quickly. And when everything was ready and he gathered the necessary items for it, he was about to set off. But when he opened the door, he saw Zhang standing in front of him. It was unclear why the teacher had come to his house. Moreover, he noticed that the boy had many strange things, and now he had a lot of questions. Understanding this, the main character tried to hide his true intentions from him and didn't answer his questions. But the teacher was persistent and decided to find out the whole truth. The boy replied that he was just about to go to his class, as he hadn't attended lessons lately. The man understood that he was lying, as no student came to school with a hammer and shovel. On the way to school, there was a very large stone that constantly got in his way, so he was planning to destroy it. He was an amateur craftsman, so he always carried a key with him to fix any malfunction. With a shovel in hand, he was planning to buy himself a tunnel, or at least find a quicker way to school. After his words, the teacher paused to think. He knew the kid was lying but didn't want to argue, so he ordered him to follow. After that, a whole bunch of police officers stormed into his room. Zhang was really upset, but there was nothing he could do. The main character realized he hadn't expected such a turn of events, and he urgently needed to come up with a new plan. Zhang was his homeroom teacher in high school and knew everything about him, so he had no doubt the kid wasn't guilty and hadn't done anything wrong. Still, he didn't worry too much and agreed to go with him to talk to the officer. The man felt really sorry for what he had done, but he simply had no choice. They hopped into a military vehicle and headed to the station so the hero could explain everything. He had no options for how to solve this problem. After a while, they arrived at the same place. He was ordered to enter the room where they were waiting for him. There were a lot of people sitting in front of him, along with a lieutenant who wanted to get to the truth. Chin saw the main character and couldn't believe this kid could be a murderer involved in such a terrible crime. The woman was extremely nervous when she saw him, realizing he was in big trouble. The lieutenant was furious. He tried to keep his cool but approached the kid and asked him what really happened. It was clear that the situation was very serious. Now, the boys had real problems that could prevent him from completing his mission. In his position, anyone would have panicked and started making up some fictional story, so he decided to stay calm and answer every question seriously. He wasn't an ordinary person, so he figured this plan was the best. Right away, he tried to act very confident, so he took off his backpack. His behavior raised a lot of questions and was confusing to the authorities. He fell to his knees and begged them not to kill him because he was innocent and asked for forgiveness. He started confessing to skipping classes and begged them not to tell the principal, promising he wouldn't do it again. He also mentioned that he was the best student and a straight-A student who always covered for his classmates. The woman who witnessed his behavior started yelling at him, wanting him to stop. Everyone else began to laugh, realizing the kid was just a regular child worried about his grades. However, his tactic didn't work and they didn't believe him, so they asked him to tell them again what had happened. Now, the boy understood he needed to come up with a different plan. Qin knew that he and Tang had tried to assault a girl, but in the end, his accomplice had died. The boy smiled, realizing the situation was far more complicated than he initially thought. He grabbed his head and started crying, trying to show how scared he was. He continued to do the same, talking about his bad behavior in school and how much he had let the principal down. Also, when he mentioned that he entered through the back door of the hotel, the man became interested and wanted him to repeat that information. In reality, he started saying he wasn't allowed to enter through the back door, so he went through the main entrance instead. The boy was crying, and now his behavior angered the men, making them much more serious and ready to talk to him in a completely different way. Qin understood the boy was trying to deceive him. His version didn't match what he had learned from the note. Now, the boy began to say that he had always wanted to build a good relationship with him to have a chance to get into the military academy. After he entered the hotel and didn't find any soldiers there, he left and went home. He didn't have money to pay for his room, plus his mom was waiting for him at home and he didn't know if she would believe the man's words. Now, he started crying again and promised he would never use illegal methods again, begging them not to cancel his exam results. It seemed the men believed his version and didn't see anything illegal in his actions, so they asked to let him go. The other soldiers were shocked that the boy was acting like a little girl, allowing himself to cry in front of serious soldiers. How was he even planning to get into the military academy after this? They started mocking him, and it seemed he had suddenly become a laughingstock for everyone. And the most important thing was that Sheninger was watching him from another room and was also suspicious of him. She was deeply offended and couldn't stand being humiliated like that. Moreover, ordinary boys had managed to catch and poison her, which was unacceptable for her level. It undermined her prestige as a major. He was ordered to calm down and get back on his feet. The principal told him to change his behavior and not do this again. It seemed the situation had cleared up as the boy really was a good student who consistently showed great results, making this situation seem simply incomprehensible. Hearing this, he finally calmed down and the man let him go. He was considered an innocent child who couldn't commit such serious crimes. Besides, they needed to find another culprit. However, there was another side to this crime. Like any teacher, he always believed in his student and that his pupils were innocent, but the girl wasn't going to let the situation go unresolved and he would definitely face consequences. The lieutenant approached and grabbed the main character. He was furious with him for failing to crack the case and find the real killer. In anger, he threw him out of the office. It seemed Qin understood the boy was trying to play innocent, but it wouldn't work. The principal didn't like his behavior and decided to punish him right in front of everyone. The man couldn't believe everyone fell for his tears as he suspected he was definitely involved in what had happened. Because this boy had booked a hotel room in the middle of the night, paid a huge amount for it, and then just vanished. Yet even that seemed like childish behavior to everyone. Besides, they could question the neighbors who definitely knew who had checked in. Suddenly, a hotel employee stood up and, with a trembling voice, said she had told the main character about his neighbors. At that moment, angry glares were directed at her. Now, she realized the situation had become much more serious. Because to solve the case, she needed to give testimony and that could prove the main character's involvement. However, the principal didn't change his mind and tried to do everything possible to let the boys go. Qin stood silently, feeling awkward and not knowing what to do. The main character was satisfied, realizing that everything had worked out and that his plan had truly succeeded. He was no longer in danger. Suddenly, other military personnel entered the room. They found people who could be witnesses and were now ready to listen to them. Qin was pleased because now he had hoped to solve the case. These people said that before entering the major's room, the main character was already there. Qin smiled when he heard this, realizing that now the boy wouldn't be able to justify himself. The witnesses were Tang and his friend, which meant they would definitely testify against the main character. Now he had to go through the military department where they would try to interrogate him. Understanding this, the principal intervened in their conversation and forbade them to touch his students or harm them in any way. Now, the lieutenant had to stay alone with him to try to interrogate him and extract all the information. He even ordered his loyal soldiers to leave the room because he didn't want anyone interrupting him. Once they were gone, he and Gaoneng were left alone. He sat down in the chair across from him, looking quite pleased, as now he had a chance to blame the main character for what had happened. The kid hadn't touched anything. There was no evidence against him, and it was unclear how they could prove his involvement. However, he understood that things were very bad, as he now had no way to redeem himself. Suddenly, the door to their room swung open. He saw his enemies enter, the ones who had survived the terrible fire and explosions. Even though they were alive, the men couldn't move on their own. They needed help just to get inside. Immediately, they pointed at him and claimed he was the one. The same kid they had seen in the woman's room. The soldier tried to get an explanation from the main character. However, the kid pretended not to know them and had never heard of the major's girl. He repeated what he had said earlier. Cheens realized that there was no point in talking to the kid and trying to make him speak, as he wasn't going to change his stance or share anything. After that, the guys started telling how when they entered her room they had already seen him there and added that the main character had attacked them and started fighting. However, Cheens didn't believe them. He got angry and approached the man. Despite the pain, he lifted him up in front of him, knowing that there had been a fire inside and the hero couldn't have harmed them in any way. After that, he asked the kid if their words were true and if he really had attacked them and beaten them up. However, he didn't understand anything and acted as if he hadn't even heard about the smoke and the fire that had occurred. Cheens was convinced that he truly knew nothing. Moreover, he remembered that the main character had been staying next to Shininga in the same hotel, and regardless of what had happened there, he kept insisting he knew nothing. The man thought he couldn't just deny his guilt and consider himself the smartest. Suddenly, a new notification popped up in front of him and he realized he wouldn't have time to complete his task. At that moment, Cheens got even angrier. He tried to hold himself back as he was furious with the main character and wanted to hit him. However, the most important thing for him was to complete his own task before time ran out completely. Then, he confessed, was Lieutenant Cheens always telling the truth? The kid knew he was trying to justify the guys. After those words, he took a step back. If Cheens was telling the truth, then why couldn't he let him go? After all, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had just rented a room in a hotel. He also knew that Cheens had made arrangements with the kid's father in advance, hoping to pin all the blame on him. Shininger had been watching everything that was happening in the room. She heard their words and knew what they were talking about. In fact, the lieutenant had long entered into an agreement with Tang's father, and now his task was to justify his son. The man began to approach the main character, but the latter warned him not to do that and not to get rid of his witness in front of everyone else. After that, when the man took another step, the hero began to scream and call for help. Then Cheens stopped, knowing that the kid wouldn't shut up and would keep doing it. However, he could no longer tolerate it and grabbed him, forcing him to be quiet. At that moment, the school principal and his teacher entered the room. They became witnesses to what was happening inside. At that moment, Cheens was holding the main character and wouldn't let go. At that moment, the principal started yelling at him. He couldn't believe that such a respected soldier would allow himself to do this to a defenseless child. Zhang was very scared and asked how he was feeling. The kid remained silent, and when the teacher tried to touch him, he pushed him away. It seemed he was very frightened and couldn't calm down. The men tried to reassure him, as they were nearby and wouldn't let anyone hurt him. Gaoneng understood that staging such a scene was very dramatic, but time was running out and he had no other choice. He had less than 10 seconds left, so he urgently needed to come up with something. Suddenly, he began to act very unpredictably. He started screaming again and seemed to even mock them. After all, he believed that nothing would happen to him, even if they proved his guilt. Hearing this, Cheens thought the kid had confessed to his crime and could be considered guilty. Now he began to mock him, saying that he was the one responsible for what had happened. Suddenly, his teacher couldn't take it anymore. He covered the kid's mouth to finally make him quiet. It seemed the main character had completely lost his mind and the military were to blame for it. Tang demanded that they let him go because the kid had confessed to being guilty and now he needed to be restrained. At the last moment, he received a notification that his task had been completed. Now he could claim a random reward. For that, he needed to play a lottery that would determine his gift. So he did it right away. The system congratulated him on his new gift. He received the eye skill, which allowed him to recognize any disguise. But this skill was only available for 5 days, and it was unclear whether it would stay with him forever. Now, he needed to think about how to make the skill permanent without having to pay for it, as he had no money. The kid continued talking to the system, but the teacher was trying to hold him back, as he couldn't understand what was really happening to him. The woman who had been watching everything in the room called the lieutenant over. She wanted to talk to the doctor, so she didn't say to bring him to her. Meanwhile, the principal continued to argue with the soldier, as he couldn't allow his best student to be harmed. After all, he was the school principal and had to ensure his safety, and right now he was planning to take the boys to the hospital, even though his actions had jeopardized the investigation. However, he was afraid that if he left the kid, he would be hurt even more and would never be able to become a normal person and return to his studies. They tried to convince him to trust his superiors and leave the matter to professionals who could uncover the truth. In the meantime, at the woman's command, Dr. Wang entered the room. Everyone was very surprised to see him, as he had come to conduct a medical examination and find out the main character's condition. When he was about to start the examination, the kid began to visibly get nervous, as this meant that his biggest secret could be revealed. He was also going to examine the other men, who were completely wrapped in bandages. So, the two of them could have head injuries which would cause them to have severe hallucinations, so it was necessary to ensure the truth of their words after the medical examination. Tang was very scared, as it seemed he had something to hide, and after this his secrets could be uncovered. He tried to argue, but he was powerless because the major's orders had to be carried out as quickly as possible. If this was the military ministry's decision, then it had to be executed immediately, and the doctor was going to examine the 2 victims. Wang was very cheerful. He wasn't worried at all, as since he started working in psychiatry, he had seen 1,000 patients and could easily distinguish lies. However, the principal didn't understand what was special about his medical examination. In fact, it was very simple. If the boys could answer his questions, their mental state would be perfectly normal. It seemed the principal began to doubt his professionalism, as everything was too simple. A quarrel started between them, and to protect his reputation, the doctor began to justify himself and list all his accomplishments, as he considered himself an experienced professional. On the way to the room, he took some surgical instruments, but he didn't intend to use them. This was special equipment he used to perform surgical operations in the military hospital, and he always kept it with him. Seeing his tools, everyone in the room fell silent. He ordered everyone to line up, as he was about to start his medical examination. If Gaunan was diagnosed, he would spend most of his life in the hospital. He had very little time left, as he needed to think about the future and complete his tasks. He needed to do everything possible to make them believe he was normal and avoid being sent to the hospital. Right now, he was going to ask them one question, and they needed to answer it simultaneously. At that moment, he began to chase after them, imagining he was a killer. The people entered a bathroom that was filled with water, and at the bottom were doors leading to salvation. They could only escape if they drained the bathtub, as then they could pass through the hidden door. They had only 2 items, a deep bowl and a spoon. They needed to make a decision right now. Tang was the first to respond and immediately chose the bowl for himself. Right away, the doctor diagnosed him and labeled him mentally ill. Tang began to cry and tried to justify himself, claiming he was perfectly healthy. But any sick person wouldn't want to admit their illness and would consider themselves healthy. After that, his friend also made a choice and took what was left, the spoon. However, his answer was incorrect, as the doctor also confirmed his diagnosis. Undoubtedly, he was mentally ill. Everyone in the room who was watching this couldn't understand how he could determine their mental state. Only the main character was left, but he wasn't in a hurry to choose anything. Moreover, he confidently replied that he wasn't going to make any choice. Wang was curious about what he was actually going to do, as if he jumped into the bathtub full of water, he wouldn't be able to get out anymore. The principal tried to stop him and didn't want the kid to answer his nonsensical question, thinking it made no sense. The kid replied that he was just going to pull the plug out of the bathtub. He remained confident in his choice even when the doctor gave him a chance to think. After that, he approached the main character, but the latter remained self-assured. Carefully and very slowly, he placed his hand on his shoulder. The kid passed the test, and his mental state was normal, as only a mentally ill person would start trying to get rid of the water with a bowl or a spoon in such a situation. After he established the diagnosis, he wanted to know if everyone agreed with him. However, the men only applauded him, especially the principal, who was convinced that his student was normal. Tang thought it was unfair and called the doctor a liar. Moreover, he also called him a psycho. Because of his words, the doctor got very angry and presented him with a knife to his throat. Also, one of the soldiers lunged at him and began to blame him for everything that had happened. He called him a psycho and a liar and couldn't believe the kid had dared to take such a step. Tang began to get so nervous that he actually believed he was truly unwell. His words could be interpreted as a confession, and now it was necessary to decide what to do with him. Qin's was going to put him under strict guard, forcing him to undergo treatment and take medication. Gowning was healthy, so it could be concluded that he wasn't lying and was telling the truth. So it was necessary to decide what to do with him. Moreover, Major Shininga ordered that if the kid was healthy, he could be free and all charges against him would be dropped. Despite the fact that the main character had passed the test and proved to everyone he was healthy, there were still certain suspicions that needed to be checked. As he was leaving, he was given a phone, but it was clear that this way they could track him. However, he didn't think about that at all, as he needed to open the treasure chest and try to get the total amount of money necessary to pass the test. Meanwhile, Shininga was trying to piece together a portrait of the main character and find out who he really was. She compared herself to him but couldn't remember what had happened to her in the room and why she had lost consciousness. Maybe it was just a dream. In reality, nothing had happened to her as she felt healthy now. However, that evening, she was planning to show her tormentor what revenge meant. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket vibrated. He felt very uncomfortable and experienced a sharp pain. His head began to hurt and he had an unexplained allergic reaction. His teachers thought he had just caught a cold, so he needed to get treated as the final exams were coming up soon. They also knew he lived not far from the school and were planning to take him home, but the kid refused. Despite the fact that he knew the theory very well, he had no practical experience, so the teachers understood that getting into a military academy would be very difficult for him. It got dark and the kid was heading home. He decided to take a walk through the night city where he met many beautiful girls who wanted to invite him to join them. However, he turned them all down as he was only thinking about his own task and the precious stones. He didn't care about their attention, as he was very handsome and could win over any of them. Calling a taxi, he planned to go to the mental hospital. However, he was warned that the trip would be very expensive. He didn't have that kind of money, so he started to haggle, and in the end, he managed to lower the price. His appearance was very suspicious, and to avoid drawing attention to himself, Gowning replied that he was going on a trip, but the taxi driver knew that in the city he was heading to, there was nothing but ruins and a psychiatric hospital. At that moment, Gowning put on a mask and seemed to be preparing to attack him. The taxi driver was very scared. Turning on the radio, he heard an urgent announcement about anomalies near the hospital where 2 people had gone missing, so everyone needed to be extremely careful. After a while, they arrived at the location. The taxi driver was so frightened that he was even afraid to speak to the main character and agreed to take a much smaller amount from him. At that moment, a hammer fell out of his bag. Hearing this, the man began to tremble and almost cried. Understanding the absurdity of the situation, the kid tried to justify himself, saying he needed it for road repairs. Also, many other items began to fall out of his bag. After that, he started explaining what he needed each of them for. The taxi driver was determined to do everything possible to make the kid finally leave his car. He even agreed not to charge him for the ride. Gowning agreed. But as soon as he got out of the car and closed the door, the driver sped off without waiting for him to pay. Gowning didn't understand what had just happened or why he felt so strongly as a man. However, he felt he had encountered a truly good and noble person who genuinely wanted to help him. Not far from him, a motorcycle was parked and he didn't even notice that someone was watching him. It was Shininger who had tracked him down by phone and wanted to make sure of his reason for going to the hospital at such a late hour. Meanwhile, the man was talking to Lieutenant Qin. The lieutenant was limited in his power and he was threatened with dismissal as they were preparing to find a new partner to replace him. However, it was very difficult to find a responsible person willing to work for them at that time. Qin understood that they wanted to fire him and tried to intimidate the man, but he saw right through it and didn't react to his words at all. It seemed he no longer trusted him. Those words angered Qin and he simply hung up the phone. The man was furious. He couldn't believe that a soldier in such a difficult situation could act so dramatically. But all it took was patience, and in time, he would find a worthy replacement. After all, he was convinced that Qin would come to him and ask for help. Meanwhile, the unknown woman arrived at her master's side to report information about the magnetic pile and share other events that had happened to her. They were planning to pressure their victim a bit more to try to find out everything he knew, plus they knew that influential people were soon coming to the city. Hearing this, the master ordered them to carry out the task. In the meantime, events shifted to the mental hospital. Shininga was preparing to get inside, and for that she needed to wake one of the patients. She painted her face and messed up her hair, dressing in special clothing, making herself look like a mentally ill woman, and now she could scare ordinary people in the middle of the night. Moreover, she knew the main character was on site. She found him on the map, moving toward the beacon, and saw that he had started robbing a local store. At that moment, he was inside one of them, smashing a window to get in. Shininger stealthily approached him, and at the most opportune moment, she tried to scare him. However, she was very mistaken as she found herself face to face with a gigantic man who was mentally unstable and had escaped from the hospital. She was terrified as she hadn't expected such a turn of events. Her scream echoed far away as she cried out. The guy heard the scream but thought it was just patients from the hospital having a tough time. In reality, Mo Yi was a very strong soldier, and to save his life, he didn't need to defend himself. For the first time in her life, she faced a real psycho, so she was extremely frightened and miscalculated her own strength. On the map, she saw that the main character was near a toy factory, but she couldn't understand what he was doing there. The factory had been abandoned for a long time, and its condition was hazardous. Inside, there were many strange objects. However, time was running out, and despite that, he was determined to finish what he had come for. Calmly, he moved through the factory. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind made him stop. He turned his attention to a suspicious object flying past his head. To protect himself from it, he swung his hammer, trying to stop it. As it turned out, it was just an ordinary cat that had startled him with its sudden appearance. From that moment, he needed to try to hide his face as there were many surveillance cameras around. He wasn't mistaken, as at that moment he was being watched from the observation room. Two unknown individuals were tracking his every move. Thinking he was just a regular homeless guy, a few days ago, they had killed one who tried to sneak into their factory. So, they had no choice and were planning to do the same to Gowning. Moreover, the guy had managed to get inside the factory, and to stop him, he called his boss, who ordered to eliminate the threat. It became clear that he was now in danger, as a real hunt had begun for him. Meanwhile, the master was in his room. He ordered his loyal servants, who were ghosts living in the factory, to deal with the main character. In their lives, they dreamed of being true authors, and this was the perfect opportunity to try to scare him to death. They considered themselves very good and hoped they had kind hearts, but despite that, they needed to scare people. He also gave them motivational words that encouraged the actors, and now they were ready to hunt him down. Meanwhile, the guy was moving through the factory, trying to survey what was happening inside. Even though he didn't believe in ghosts, he kept hearing strange sounds whose origin he couldn't understand. Suddenly again, the strongest of them. He heard it right behind him. Turning around, he saw a ghost just a few meters away from him. Its face was so terrifying and realistic that the hero believed in its existence. Moreover, it appeared too suddenly, and anyone in his place would have been scared too. Despite that, Gowning charged at it. He started moving quickly in its direction and pulled out his hammer, as it seemed the actor was in danger. Even though the ghost began to scream, trying to stop him, the guy didn't stop and struck. The blow was so strong and powerful that the mask flew off its face, and he realized it was just an ordinary person. Despite having hurt him, he felt no shame, as he wouldn't let anyone scare him. These people just woke up as ghosts to scare those who dared to enter, and that was unacceptable. More than anything, the main character wanted to know who the man was who tried to scare him, so he tried to find out who he really was. Immediately, the system congratulated him on his victory over the ghost, but there was no reward for it. Because of this, he became very angry, as if he had relied on gifts from the system every time, he would have starved to death. The best way to earn money was not to ask for it, but to steal it, and that's exactly what he was doing. This time, he managed to steal a lot of coins, and he considered himself richer because this money would last him a long time. After robbing the ghost, he took 500 coins from it, thinking they wouldn't be needed anymore. Meanwhile, his ally noticed that the ghost hadn't returned for a long time. He suspected that something terrible had happened and was going to check what had really happened. But when he entered the factory, he saw a horrifying scene. He cautiously approached the main character. The latter, unaware of anything, continued to stand over his victim's body, counting the money he had earned. However, after a while, he heard suspicious sounds behind him and realized someone was approaching. After that, he turned around and decided to check what was really happening. But when the man saw the main character, he was extremely frightened. Trying to earn even more money, the main character wanted to chase him down and kill him, while the other, sensing danger, tried to escape. Despite his efforts to flee, he didn't succeed. At this rate, it seemed the guy could make a decent amount of money, as each ghost yielded a generous reward. He was genuinely satisfied with his work. But just as he was about to leave, he changed his mind, deciding he could bury the ghost. However, he needed to come up with another plan, as he had very little time to buy the pit. He hoped to kill a few more, after which he would bury them all together. Suddenly, other people appeared before him, wanting to avenge their dead comrades. They seemed determined, as they were armed and not planning to back down. Seeing them, Gowning felt a rush of excitement, realizing that money was coming to him. He pulled out his hammer and key, preparing to kill people to earn a lot of money. When the fight began, the people realized they had made a terrible mistake, as the guy was much stronger than they had thought. Gowning easily dealt with them and considered himself invincible. He realized that money could be earned very easily, and he didn't need to exert any effort for it. Now he was ready to go inside and hoped there would be even more ghosts. His fear had passed, and he was confident he could defeat any opponent. He entered the factory and realized it was very dark and cold inside. He searched all the rooms, but found no ghosts, and to earn the necessary amount, this was not enough. Still, he decided to continue searching, as he didn't want to give up so easily and leave empty-handed. Suddenly, someone touched him. He hadn't noticed how someone had approached him from behind. For a second, his heart stopped. In a fit of anger and sudden fear, he struck. However, it was all in vain, and the unknown person managed to dodge. Behind him stood a girl holding a toy, looking like someone with mental disorders. Now she extended the toy toward him, and with one swift motion, she tore it in half. Gowning lunged at her, thinking she was a ghost and his chance to earn a lot of money again. When he struck, he again failed to hit his target. His victim dodged again and ended up right behind him, and he didn't even have time to react. After that, he struck again, but it was all for nothing. The girl managed to dodge once more and only smiled at him. Now he understood. The new ghost he encountered was nothing like the others, and it seemed the ghosts inside the factory were much stronger. Shin Ninger spoke some incomprehensible words, trying to scare the main character and make him believe she was mentally ill. After a while, he realized she wasn't a ghost but a person who had escaped from the mental hospital. He also noticed she moved very quickly and he couldn't catch up to her or hit his target. Suddenly, she removed her mask and showed her face to the girl. He wanted her to stop scaring him and let him go because he realized he wouldn't be able to defeat her. Suddenly, she suggested they dance, and only a true psycho would agree to dance in the middle of the night in an abandoned factory. So she asked him to clap and cautiously began to approach him. The guy prepared himself and was ready to kill her at the most opportune moment. He understood this was his chance, as the girl had let her guard down and he waited for her to come even closer. However, he wanted to find out who she really was and why she was approaching him. He watched her closely and suddenly he began to understand everything. The girl's appearance was very familiar and it seemed he had seen her before. After a while, he realized exactly who she was. Now, there was no doubt that he was facing Major Shin Ninger. Realizing this, he was in shock as he couldn't understand why she was following him and trying to get into the factory. Had she already uncovered him? And did everyone know about his plan? She continued to ask him to dance with her. Still, the main character agreed and was ready to do everything she asked just to divert suspicion away from himself. After a while, they began to dance and clap, doing everything as she wished. Meanwhile, the factory guards were sleeping in their room. Suddenly, they woke up to the sound of an alarm. A lot of time had passed, but the ghost still hadn't appeared and there was no information about the guy who had gotten inside. They were going to check the surveillance cameras to ensure they were still alive. When they saw what had happened, they couldn't believe their eyes. It was so horrifying that they looked several times, as they couldn't believe what had really happened. After that, they watched as the guy with the mental illness danced. What was happening was some kind of miracle, as they had never seen anything like it before. The bodies of the ghosts lay side by side and there was no doubt they were all dead. The men didn't know what to do, but it was clear they needed to go down to the factory to kill them. However, if the people managed to deal with the ghosts, it meant they were very strong and it wouldn't be so simple. They were going to urgently inform their superiors about this. The main character woke up, feeling very happy to dance. But he was very worried that the girl was following him and had managed to uncover his secret. But it seemed she wasn't showing her true intentions at all and continued to dance despite the fact that the guy was armed and had left bodies behind him. He tried to calm himself, believing she had no evidence. Suddenly, her face changed and the guy was very frightened, realizing this. She stopped dancing and began to approach him. It seemed something was wrong with his energy, and she felt it. She also realized he recognized her, but couldn't understand how he had managed to do that. Gowning understood that now he needed to be very careful, as he was taking a huge risk. She kept moving closer to him, and to protect himself, he grabbed a weapon. He swung his hammer in front of her face, trying to stop her. However, after the next strike, she simply grabbed his weapon and halted him. Moreover, the guy felt an incredible surge of energy. She managed to melt a piece of metal, leaving him with just the wooden handle. After that, the girl donned her real suit and became the very same major. Plus, she smiled, knowing that the hero's weapon posed no threat to her. Gowning began to flee. He realized he was in trouble and she could kill him and ruin his chances of making money. Yet she remained calm, understanding that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't just escape. Suddenly, handcuffs appeared on his legs, causing him to fall and rendering him unable to move. Now he was truly trapped. She stood before him, asking him to say his last words. However, he couldn't believe he was about to die. He thought he was too young for this and wanted to live. He tried to distract her and do everything he could to escape. But now she didn't believe a word he said and watched his every move closely. Just then she summoned her dragon, but another man appeared unexpectedly and stopped it. Amazingly, he managed to control her power and fight against him. Furthermore, he wasn't alone. Behind him were his allies, ready to stop her. Shinninger understood that these people were no pushovers. However, the hero replied that he didn't know who they were or why they had appeared. She realized he was telling the truth. If he had known them, he would be dead. When they saw the woman, they understood she didn't look like an ordinary sick person. They had heard of a major in the army who could control the energy of metal. She fit that description perfectly, so it was safe to conclude that they were indeed facing Shinninger. For them, it was an honor, so the man in the white suit began to introduce himself. He was 33, unmarried, and had no children. Shinninger also stated her name. The man was delighted to meet her and showered her with compliments. However, after those words, he charged at her, trying to destroy her. To protect herself, she used the energy of her dragon and attempted to stop his powerful attack. She understood that these were treacherous people trying to gain her trust and deceive her. During his battle with the dragon, an immense amount of energy was being released. Suddenly, the room became very bright. The hero watched what was happening, unable to believe how strong these people were. They all tried to surround Shinninger, attacking from different sides. But despite this, she had to defend herself and protect against all their assaults. It was a battle between true energy warriors who were very experienced and could easily control their power. At that moment, a system appeared before him and offered him a new mission. For him, it was primarily a chance to save himself and escape the factory alive. But when he read the mission's conditions, he couldn't understand if he needed to save the girl or try to kill her again. Everything was so unclear that he needed to find a clue. However, the system wouldn't let him do that, and now he had to choose a difficulty level. The hero understood nothing and tried to get some explanations about his mission. But the system only suggested he take the hardest level to earn an even greater reward. Now it became so confusing that the guy didn't know what to do. A loud explosion sounded behind him. He didn't know what had happened, but he hoped Shinninger was alive. If she died, he would have no ally left and would become the next victim. Despite the powerful blow, her dragon was still alive. The man who could control the power of flames was trying to melt the dragon, which was made of metal. This man was an energy warrior capable of controlling magnetic energy. Moreover, he was very fast, and under such conditions, the iron dragon would soon melt and be unable to protect them. Additionally, the major was only using ordinary energy and couldn't resist his incredible strength. The dragon was made of the best metal, but even that didn't help it achieve its goal and remain unharmed. In pain, the strange creature began to scream, and it seemed its end was near. But despite this, it managed to resist. The dragon attacked the man and managed to bite him in half. Now, the strongest energy warrior was dead, and the woman, along with her other ally, was left alone. The hero realized that Shinninger was incredibly strong, as she had defeated a powerful warrior in just a few seconds. Now she was choosing her next victim. Her dragon was a far more powerful weapon than they could imagine. If they had known how strong she was, they wouldn't have dared to engage her in open combat. They weren't going to give up, so they tried everything possible to defeat her. An explosion rang out. Immediately, an unfamiliar smell, reminiscent of sulfur, filled the air. Now it was the unknown woman's turn, and she tried to defeat the dragon with her own weapon. First of all, she wanted to restrict its movements, so she attempted to bind it with stylish ropes. They tightened them so much that it seemed its movements were indeed becoming limited. Now, they wanted the iron dragon to suffer from corrosion. Because of this, it risked falling apart into tiny pieces. Ganning understood that his enemies could also control other elements, including sulfur and copper. It was hard for him to imagine how strong his enemies were since he didn't have the opportunity to engage them in open combat. In reality, the dragon couldn't resist their new elements. However, that wasn't all it was capable of, and it was about to demonstrate its true power. Because of this, her enemies panicked greatly, realizing she truly wasn't an ordinary soldier. In her hands was the very tablet that concealed a powerful energy. To release it, she broke it into 2 equal parts. Immediately, energy began to radiate from it, enveloping her entire body. The flashes were so intense that the hero managed to hide to protect himself from the bright radiation. While they fought, he planned to try to escape. When the enemies saw her true power, they were ready to run away, realizing they risked dying. However, it was already too late and they had no chance of escape. Now, her dragon had become much stronger and had developed armor to protect it from the effects of sulfur and other harmful substances. The woman tried to flee, but she understood she was doomed. With no other option, she attempted to resist. To do this, she tried to protect herself and create a special protective dome to contain its power. But with one move of the dragon, her defense was shattered and she found herself in danger. She sustained serious injuries and was thrown several meters away, landing on the ground. Serious wounds appeared on her body and she couldn't get back on her feet to continue fighting. At that moment, she saw the hero. Their eyes met and she realized he was trying to escape. He was trying to distance himself from her, thinking she was pursuing him. He quickly understood that this wasn't the case. She was injured and couldn't keep fighting. It also seemed to him that she was afraid of him and was trying to get closer, as she didn't know his origins or how strong he was. Suddenly, a terrifying monster appeared just a few meters away from him. It was a creation of Schneninger, and he had never seen anything like it before. The sight filled him with fear. Moreover, the woman with pink hair also began to panic, realizing she had no chance against such a monster. She tried to save herself, pleading for mercy and not to be killed. However, the monster didn't listen to her, and it became clear what would happen to her once it crushed her. The hero was anxious, knowing the woman wouldn't stop and he would be the next target she wanted to kill. However, she turned to him with a new task, as the last enemy still alive was to become his victim. Out of fear, the guy couldn't refuse her and agreed to do everything she said. However, he wasn't a tool and wouldn't let anyone use him, as he had a sense of pride. Realizing he had no other choice, he challenged her, despite the fact that she was seriously injured. She was very frightened, as she didn't know how strong he truly was and what threat he might pose. The guards were watching everything that was happening. They were terrified and couldn't believe their eyes. Now they didn't know what to do or who could help them deal with such strong people. However, they understood that they couldn't handle it alone, so they had another option. Immediately, they called their master and told him everything that had happened at the factory. Soon, the factory would meet its end and they needed to stop the 2 people. The mistress hung up the phone. It was very dark outside and she realized that perhaps Schneninger could be at the factory. She wondered if her husband knew anything about what had happened. But he remained silent and didn't understand what she meant. The girl knew he was lying, as his dreams and his whole life revolved around working for the Alliance, and if the major died, he wouldn't be able to achieve that. From the very beginning, he planned to wait until she passed the information to the lieutenant, after which he would blow up the factory along with her and his men. Now, it was a good opportunity to blow up his main target. Moreover, he promised to kill his wife if she didn't keep this secret. There was a lot of explosives in the factory, and at her command, the girl could die at any moment. Schneninger's death had to remain a secret for both of them, as only they knew what had truly happened. She was planning to leave, inviting her husband to come see the factory after it happened. He agreed to do so, as it was the only way he could confirm whether the girl was really dead. Meanwhile, the standoff continued. The hero took advantage of the fact that his victim was scared and injured, so he dared to strike first. Suddenly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out some unclear object. This frightened her greatly as she thought he might have some special capsule he would use right then. But it was just an ordinary key. Despite that, she became even more scared. Now he was about to deliver a powerful blow. He swung but only broke his chains that had been hindering his movement. After saying goodbye to everyone, he began to run. The monster started chasing him, trying to stop him. Now, the guy understood he needed to hurry, as he risked dying. Suddenly, he saw a cat in front of him, the same one he had encountered at the entrance of the factory, and thought it might be some kind of sign. He saw the animal jump into a hatch and realized that was his only escape. Shininger couldn't believe he had managed to escape so easily. She considered herself invincible and possessed immense talent. This wasn't the end, and she was determined to continue pursuing the hero. Feeling in danger, the guy relaxed and moved much slower. He believed this was his victory and knew the monster wouldn't be able to reach him in the sewer. Moreover, he hadn't completed the task, but he understood he needed to survive. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice calling out to him. Now he realized he was in a very dangerous situation, as she had likely managed to descend into the sewer and was still pursuing him. He promised to tell her everything only after she caught him. Shininger understood she had to do something, as at this rate he would really escape. To do this, she touched a metal pipe and applied her own power. Very quickly, the pipe lost its shape and turned into jelly. The guy realized something strange was happening, as he now felt many footsteps rapidly approaching him. From the metal, she created metal dogs that began to chase him right now. They were so fierce and numerous that they could easily catch up to him and kill him. Seeing this, he began to panic and couldn't believe his own eyes. Fortunately, he managed to find a narrow passage that the creatures seemed unable to squeeze through. This allowed him to hide for a while so the animals might not notice him. It worked, and a huge number of metal beasts passed by him. But suddenly one of them stopped, having heard a strange sound. They all immediately rushed into that same narrow passage to try to catch up with him. Gowning couldn't understand how they managed to catch up to him so quickly, and he also couldn't grasp how she was able to wield the power of metal. Moreover, he realized that the energy warriors were incredibly powerful, and he needed to do everything he could to become as strong as they were. She was closing in on him, moving so fast that it felt like he had no chance of escape. Still, he didn't stop and kept moving through the narrow tunnel. The dogs were hot on his heels, leaving him no opportunity to flee. Shininga started to squeeze through the narrow passage alongside him. Now, the main character found himself in real danger. He saw a dead end ahead and knew he couldn't turn back. In a panic, he began kicking boxes, not understanding how they had ended up there. Behind him stood a girl with her new army. She knew he had no choice but to confront her. He couldn't keep running. She was going to give him a few seconds to explain why he had barged into her room and attacked her. However, he remained silent, staring into her eyes and the danger they represented. Suddenly, she realized that the boxes behind him might not just be ordinary trash. She started shouting for him to run. But it was too late. Flames erupted behind him. A loud explosion rang out, making it clear that it was explosives. The fire spread rapidly throughout the factory, and it was uncertain if anyone in the blast zone would survive. He understood that the crates behind him were filled with explosives. To save his own life and escape the flames, he began to run. Shininger couldn't let him die without hearing the truth, so she tried to protect him. She used her power to save him and stop the flames. His body was enveloped in a protective dome that kept him safe from harm. But the blast was so powerful that it wasn't enough. She moved closer and covered him with a golden dome. The dome was made of a very strong metal that wouldn't melt under intense fire. This was the only way they could save their lives and stay alive. The powerful explosion destroyed the sewer walls and the entire factory, leaving a lot of debris around. However, thanks to her efforts, they were safe. The main character tried to attack her again, seizing the moment to try and kill her. Realizing this, she stopped him. They began to fight inside the dome, and she firmly grabbed his body, lifting him in front of her. He didn't understand why she had saved his life when she had been trying to kill him all along. She gave him a few seconds to explain everything, promising to take away his protection, and then he would surely die. He also noticed a new notification and realized he had less than 5 minutes left in his trial. She began counting, trying to force him to speak. Now he had very little time left, and he understood that perfectly. However, he had a backup plan that he intended to use. Suddenly, she heard a strange sound coming from his clothes and felt something moving. Shininger couldn't believe her eyes. What she saw terrified her. She hadn't even thought about what city they were in right now. Because in his clothes was the very rat she feared more than death. He threw the rat right at her. and he realized that this was the perfect moment to try to attack and escape. For this, he grabbed his weapon. He understood that only a few seconds remained and he needed to act as quickly as possible. While she was distracted trying to shake off the rat, the main character struck. With all his strength, Gowning hit her right on the head, causing her to feel excruciating pain. Shininga looked at him while she was still conscious. After the blow, she couldn't speak and felt herself losing consciousness as her head throbbed painfully. When she fell to the ground, the protective dome around them shattered. The boy found himself amidst the ruins of the destroyed factory and received a notification that he had completed his trial. Gowning sighed in relief, thrilled that he had managed to do it. Moreover, he received a generous reward, a huge chest filled with gifts. Additionally, he had the chance to spin a roulette wheel for another reward. Gowning was overjoyed and couldn't wait to open his treasure chest. He also realized that the best tasks and rewards came from dangerous situations. Along with other gifts, he received silk that would help him in critical situations. The system wished him luck, but the main character was not satisfied with his gift. He tried to understand why he received some miserable fabric as a reward for such a difficult trial and couldn't see how it could help him. But life wasn't what it seemed, especially since he had a special pill again. Its effects were nothing like the one he had taken before. This pill could enhance all his senses and sharpen his smell and sight. The boy examined it closely and realized it was quite unusual. Moreover, he knew he would have to test his body again. Even though he didn't consider himself a strong warrior, he was glad for such a gift. Now he faced a new problem. He didn't know when the girl would wake up. He understood that he couldn't try to save her because if she woke up, she would definitely want to kill him. So, to ensure his safety, he tied her up so she couldn't continue pursuing him. Now, she was no longer a threat to him since it would take her a while to untie herself. Once he realized he was safe, he decided to try his new pill immediately. He calmly lay next to her body and waited for the long-awaited effect to kick in. A minute passed, but he felt nothing. Even after a few minutes, he still felt nothing and began to think that the pill hadn't worked. Suddenly, he felt an unfamiliar voice in his head and couldn't understand what was happening to him. It seemed like someone inside him was sensing footsteps and a presence, but he couldn't make sense of it. It felt like there was a solid dome around him. Suddenly, it began to crack. His head throbbed painfully and he didn't understand what was really happening to him. However, he knew for sure that this effect was nothing like the previous one. Suddenly, he saw two familiar figures in front of him and realized he could foresee future events. He recognized that these were the people searching the factory for bodies. The boy quickly realized that the man who saw him was very familiar. It was Tangda. Even though he was far away, he could still hear them and feel their presence. Now, he truly understood what happened to a person when all their senses were heightened to the maximum. He realized they were talking about some letter and important events that were supposed to happen the next day. Moreover, the man was planning to go to the factory alone while the woman would wait for him. He saw Tangda get into a car and drive away. His astonishment knew no bounds when he realized the man had actually gone to a mental hospital. But why had the woman gone there secretly from him? The main character saw everything she did but couldn't understand what was really happening. Inside the walls of the mental hospital was a hidden passage, so she descended into the underground. As she moved through the underground labyrinths, the boy tried to memorize the path for future use. In reality, there was a massive factory underground. It was a huge factory that almost no one knew about, built on the hospital grounds. This meant that the factory he had found was merely a decoy and the real operation had been lying in wait for him all along. Suddenly, he saw that the unknown woman met with a strange man. It seemed he was her enemy, as he looked very suspicious and was dressed in black. He tried to understand everything, but it was hard to recognize who he really was. He exerted tremendous effort to get closer to them, but he couldn't see anything. Suddenly, darkness began to close in around him. He almost succeeded, but then, just like that, the effect ended. The boy realized he was extremely tired and could no longer continue observing the strange people. However, he had gained very important information and now knew where the real factory was and how to get inside. After that, he became curious to check his own stats and see how much his strength and endurance had grown. In the future, he would be able to take on trials at a higher difficulty level and earn more rewards for it. His priority was to find a way into the factory. He also knew that the pipe he was in was connected to the factory, and to get inside, he could keep moving straight through it. He could try to go through it right now, but he had a big problem. Ganon couldn't just leave her alone. If her body was found in that state, they would definitely want to kill her. He decided to take her pills and keep them until she found him again. He hoped to earn a lot of money and find the magnetic pile. Suddenly, Gowning noticed that his victim was starting to wake up. He had very little time left, so he picked her up and began carrying her with him, and she was curious about why he was doing this. The boy didn't stop and continued moving through the labyrinths, hoping to find the real factory. Even though it was very difficult for him, he kept going. He remembered the layouts of the underground labyrinths and his vision, hoping he was moving in the right direction. However, carrying a heavy girl was no easy task, and he had to be very careful not to injure himself or fall. Moreover, it was very dark, making it feel extremely challenging. He also realized that his mental strength had significantly decreased in a short time. After all, this was taking a lot out of him. To avoid getting lost, he had to use his power and check the area every few minutes, but each time his radius of vision grew smaller as his strength waned. Gowning understood that it was best to use his power to illuminate his path over a shorter distance to ensure he didn't miss anything and had a chance to conserve his strength. The boy had covered more than half the distance ahead. But the hardest part remained, because he needed to figure out a way to get inside the factory. But before going further, he needed to try to restore his strength. After resting a bit, he used his superpower again to see what was happening on the factory grounds. He realized that someone had started digging. Now, there was a chance they had ended up in a mine. This was a very good sign, as the deep mine and the magnetic pile could be located close to each other. To try to verify this, he needed to start digging. He was so motivated that he kept moving even though his strength hadn't fully recovered. He was on the right track and realized he was only a few meters away, but now he had to act very cautiously. If the guards saw him, they would catch and kill him very quickly. He had a clue, so he decided to wait until nightfall. It could be said that he had managed to decipher the first clue, and his progress in completing the difficult task had increased. He managed to overhear a conversation among the miners and learned that half of them had gone off for a break. The others were preparing to stand guard to ensure no outsiders entered. Their work was very hard, so they were tired. The miners needed a rest, so it could be concluded that they would fall asleep very quickly. Perhaps he wouldn't have to wait as long as he thought. And when they fell asleep, the boy decided to act so as not to waste any more time. Suddenly, Shininger opened her eyes. She had woken up. She saw the main character using his spiritual power. Because of this, he didn't notice that she had woken up and started watching him. Also, Shininga was very poorly tied up, and it would only take her a few seconds to free herself. However, she couldn't do that because the boy had taken her magical capsules and she planned to wait. She woke up groggy but realized he wasn't going anywhere. In fact, Gowning understood everything. And to prevent her from having the chance to do so, he decided to knock her out again with all his strength, hitting her on the head. Shininger realized she couldn't deceive him. He truly understood everything. Gowning even felt relieved when she woke up, as he had already thought she was dead. Now, he needed to act and come up with a new plan while the guards were asleep. Even though she had tried to kill him, Shininga was a member of the Alliance, and she needed to preserve her life at all costs because she had a mission. The system had told him this, and now he understood that he actually needed to try to save the woman. For saving her and successfully completing the trial, he could earn a massive stash of golden treasure chests filled with gifts. Moreover, this task was quite unusual, as there was no time limit for completion, and rewards could be claimed at any moment. Plus, it was getting dark soon, and he needed to act right away. So, Gowning lifted his captive before him and began preparing to infiltrate the factory. While the guards were distracted, he seized the moment. He managed to sneak up on the sleeping men without being noticed. Now, nothing stood in his way to knock them out so they wouldn't interfere with him. He considered himself a strong man and a spiritual mage who could foresee the future and see events happening far away. To avoid drawing attention, he had managed to change into work clothes, but inside the factory his powers weren't as strong. Perhaps it was because he was near the magnetic pile and couldn't control its immense energy. He needed to dig, as that was the only way he could get rich and finally earn the money he needed. Suddenly, another worker approached him, surprised to see him working so late. He kept talking to the main character, but Gowning didn't turn around to avoid attracting attention. Realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, he took a desperate step. Trying to deflect suspicion, he struck up a conversation with the stranger. He managed to convince the man that he just wanted to earn more money and was trying to work faster and better than the others, so he told his colleague to leave him alone and continued on to take a break. The pay for guards and miners was very low, but despite that, he needed to work. The guy didn't stop and soon managed to dig up a lot of ore. The pit he found himself in became very deep. Several hours passed since he started digging, but he had no success. He covered the mouths of the unconscious guards so they wouldn't scream when they woke up. He realized he was getting nowhere and wanted to give up. However, he promised himself to work for another hour, and if nothing came of it, only then would he leave. Another guard approached him again, commenting on how he had been working all night. This was a man who had decided to come to work very early because he also wanted to earn more money. But he hadn't expected to see the main character there. Gowning tried to talk to him without drawing attention. But he quickly realized that the work shift had already started and all the workers had returned to their posts. Now it was very risky to stay among the crowd and he needed to come up with a way to escape. Suddenly he noticed a precious gem at his feet. It was a valuable ore that one of the workers had found. Realizing this, he started jumping for joy, believing he could finally become rich and never return to his hard job. But his joy quickly turned to shock as he received a hard punch to the face. Gowning saw that he had found what he was looking for and decided to claim this reward for himself. The boy thought his action was justified because if it weren't for him, they wouldn't have found the ore and he wouldn't become rich. He stood his ground, but the other workers hesitated to confront him. There, he heard a strange voice. Someone from the crowd asked who the gem really belonged to. It seemed to be the leader who was managing the group of men working for him. The confident worker tried to bargain with the main character, wanting to take the gem for himself at any cost. For that, he could get 1,000 coins, which didn't satisfy him at all. Gowning began to fight with the man who was trying to forcibly take what belonged to him. Someone from the crowd replied that the true value of this ore was 300,000 coins. When Gowning heard this, he realized they were trying to cheat him. He couldn't stand for that, so he struck back hard. As a result, his opponent flew back several meters, and a wound on his face began to bleed. When everyone else saw what was happening, they realized it was best not to mess with Gowning. Gowning wasn't about to give it up to anyone because it was his key to true wealth and passing the trial. When his colleagues saw how brutally Gowning treated their friends, they began to fear him. Now they started calling for help. Because of the uprising and fight that broke out among the group, the alarm went off. It seemed someone had started robbing the mine, so the alarm was triggered. The men tried to grab the main character and take his ore. So most of them grabbed shovels and attempted to attack him. They considered it their own treasure. But Gowning wasn't about to give up so easily and began to defend himself against the attackers. Very quickly, everyone realized that Gowning was incredibly strong and began to think he might be a special agent sent by another country. The strongest man in the crowd tried to kill him with his bare hands. In reality, he was a martial arts master and had previously been an athlete. At first glance, he seemed like an ordinary guy, but he actually possessed extraordinary strength and combat skills. But even so, the boy easily dealt with him. He simply walked past him, not even noticing that the man was trained and very strong. Others began to see him as a true monster and fighter, believing he was genuinely unbeatable.